Hello, hello, everyone. It's so good to be with you. This is Earth Sky Woman Tammy Brunk, and I'm here today with a kind of an unusual offering. I haven't been doing much beyond monthly YouTubes for a while, but I'm finally getting that itch to offer deeper courses, and it just feels like this moment we're in as a species, and also particularly here in the US, it's just vital to begin um, to come together, and I want to use astrology as a medicine for our time. So I'll just leave that there. Okay, so we're going to have an eclipse. I'm going to go ahead. I've got a PowerPoint put together for you because there's a lot to cover. And before I get started, for those of you who are listening for the first time, welcome. For those of you who have been listening to me for a while, thank you. Thank you to both of you, both groups, for being present. I feel really honored that you would take the time for this. I know there's so much out there. And so thank you for being present. I'm so grateful and happy to be with you today. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen because there's a lot to cover with this eclipse. So I'm going to go ahead and begin. Okay. All right. So this October 2nd, which is a Wednesday of next week, 2024, it's the annular solar eclipse in Libra. And I'm calling this one Awakening the Peacemakers. And you will understand why by the time we're complete today. So this is an extraordinary eclipse, and it's an extraordinary moment that we're living in. My sense with this eclipse and the eclipse portal we've been moving through is that it is a time where we can collapse timelines, we can make magic, and of course, there is shadow work to be done. But can we play with that? Can we explore that as an opportunity for greater aliveness? Let's think of it that way. I think we're invited to greater aliveness right now. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start. This is a little blurry. My apologies for that, but I wanted to just go ahead and show you where the eclipse is going to be seen in terms of the full annular eclipse, Ring of Fire eclipse. And it's really going to be in South America, the point of greatest interesting placements. I'm just sharing this because it's interesting what's getting activated. It's Easter Island and the Falkland Islands and the southern tip of South America. So I'm going to go ahead and move forward from that so we don't have to look at that blurriness, but I wanted you to see it. And I pointed out because my sense is that, and I've been talking about this since 2017, that there are a series of eclipses that have crisscrossed the Americas, or Turtle Island, as Indigenous peoples sometimes refer to North America and sometimes all of the Americas. And my sense is that these eclipses are pointing to, and perhaps even potentially um, activating, the awakening of human consciousness at a deeper level at this time. And that to me, it's a X marks the spot, that what's happening in the Americas right now is incredibly important for the well-being of the entire planet. That's not to just put us first, but what happens here, obviously, impacts the world in an enormous way. So, all right, I'm going to just go ahead. Here is the chart for the total annular eclipse, and it is at 10 Libra. You'll see here's the sun and the moon at 10 Libra, so in the sign of Libra. And it is also, this is my location here, so I'm broadcasting from Wooldridge, Missouri, right along the Missouri River. And so a couple things. I'm going to kind of go over the basics of what this eclipse is about, and then I'll break it down by the different parts. So first of all, it's 1:49 p.m. Central Time that this is that the new moon is exact. So the eclipse has other timings that you can look up pretty easily online. But when the sun and the moon are exactly conjunct, that's about 1:49 p.m. Central. And there are many features of this eclipse that are very significant. One is that it is aligned to Purima, the star of prophecy and the girdle of the Virgin. And the constellation, the priestess or the Virgin, or people usually know it as Virgo in the sky. It's also, and when I saw this, I was kind of blown away. It is conjunct both Black Moon Lilith and Astrea. And so those are, Black Moon Lilith is actually a point in the sky that is kind of the opposite point as our moon. You can see it as the dark of the moon. So it's not a celestial object, but it is a very important point in space. And I feel it has really potent medicine for our time. And Astrea is an asteroid. And so you can see there's a lot of this feminine presence here in this eclipse, and we're going to talk about that. Okay, so then it's also at the same time that this is happening, again, this theme of the feminine and the dark feminine, Uranus has been traveling near Algol, which is the star in the forehead of Medusa. And that's been happening since August. So this is a very strong feature that I don't think enough people are talking about, but it's significant. And then also the sun is conjunct Mercury, and then we have Mars aligned with Sirius. So Mars, you'll see here, the sacred masculine, which is in the sign of Cancer right now, forecasting a new cycle beginning in Cancer in January. And it is really near Sirius, which is closer to about 14 degrees. And it also, Mars and Venus are close to a trine, exact trine, at the time of the eclipse. So there are a lot of reasons why I think that this eclipse is offering a portal for peacemaking. And those are a few of the reasons why. So we'll go more deeply into this as I go through. Okay. Before I start with that, I just want to talk a little bit about eclipses. Now, eclipses can be, depending on how far you want to go down the rabbit hole, there's so much we could focus on with eclipses, everything from what Saros series is it a part of, how long does does the eclipse energy last? All those kinds of things are interesting to consider. I want to start with some really basic ways of understanding and working with it that feel to me like it's kind of more body-based, like we can really sense and feel it. And the first is that the moment of the eclipse, whether it's a lunar or a solar eclipse, and you'll have an eclipse season twice a year, right? So first of all, just to understand that at the new moon, just for a little refresher, what the new moon is the new moon is a time where the sun and the moon are located in about the same position in the sky. Now, often, usually at the new moon, the moon, because it's not exactly lined up with the sun, is going to be a little bit above or a little bit below the sun from our perspective, right? So there's not a precise alignment. And at a full moon, similar. At this full moon, there's the sun, and then here's the moon, and it's making a line, but we are between the sun and the moon, and they are opposite one another. So the light of the sun is shining on the face of the moon. So, but usually, again, at a full moon, the moon is slightly above or below the line of the earth and the sun. And so there's not a precise alignment. And that's why usually you'll see the full moon at the full moon, right? So what an eclipse is, interestingly, is when the sun and the moon and the earth are perfectly lined up or more perfectly lined up than normal. And so it's like the way I often see it is that it's like a lock and a key. It's like when you're using one of those combination locks and you've got to get it just right so that the key so that it opens. That's kind of how this is. It's a portal. And so, when these three great luminaries, including the earth at the center or on either side, when they are lined up perfectly, then magic happens. It is a time where it's like the veils are thinner and it's kind of a portal that's opening. So there's a lot of energy coming in and there's a lot of opportunity for shifts and changes. And a lot of that, let's be honest, is really out of our control. There's something so mysterious and potent about eclipses. There's a reason people historically were afraid of them. And I'm not recommending that people be afraid of them, but I think what that fear was is two things. One is that I've become convinced that most of the most sacred places on the land, sacred concepts, sacred beings, for example, Christ, um, have been in some way, shape, or form either extracted from or placed with something different, or they have been distorted or inverted. And so my sense, again, with eclipses, it's similar. So, and to look at it in a more neutral way, um, there's a lot of energy there. There's a lot of potential for, you could say, otherworldly beings or extraordinary energies to come into play. And so we're afraid of what we don't understand, and we don't understand a lot of what's coming through during an eclipse. So that's part of why we're afraid of it. Also, it's a control program, right? If we're in a fear, of these in these moments of great potency, where yes, there's a lot that's out of our control, but also we can work with these energies to our benefit, and we can align ourselves with the medicine and magic, then we're not really we're not empowering ourselves, and my sense and what I've been taught is we inform the mysteries as much as they inform us. So it's very powerful to understand these mysteries. Okay. So eclipses can be seen as wild cards. So we don't know what's going to happen during an eclipse. That's number one, as I've kind of talked about before. And part of how I see it is that this in general, I actually think that we're in this very strange moment where simultaneously as human beings, we're being asked to become more humble and actually to overcome speciesism or human supremacy, meaning that we're not the only species here on the planet. And so we're part of a larger family of life. So it's to begin to come into right relationship and balance with the rest of creation. I think that that's what we absolutely are required to do at this time. And listen to any Indigenous elder, they will say this. I also think at the same time, strangely, we are being, we must, each of us individually, step into our sovereignty. And when I say sovereignty, what I mean by that is to heal and clear the parts of ourselves that are are wounded to a degree that we're carrying a lot of pain or guilt or shame on a level that it opens us up to giving our power away to um, systems of belief or to other individuals so that we think that they can save us. Um, there's sovereignty to me has to do with acknowledging the true power and potency of each one of us, that we are each divine beings, that we each were incarnated at this time, is my belief, with a purpose. And that most of us, I don't know what the percentage is now, but we've all heard that saying that we're only using a tiny proportion of our minds or our consciousness. That's what I'm talking about when I'm saying we are sovereign. We're here to cultivate our full potential, and we're only using a little bit of it. So it's about becoming more humble in terms of understanding we're connected to everything and we're here to play an important role, but we're not the only thing. And also to recognize that we are powerful beyond measure, and particularly so when we are aligning ourselves with the good of the whole. So, in any case, with that wild card, eclipse, my assumption is that the eclipse itself and the energies of the eclipse and of all astrological phenomena is, in fact, to be of benefit, to support in the evolution of our consciousness and in helping us to come into greater balance and alignment with the whole. That's my sense. So if it's a wild card, what's unexpected, then it serves us. So whatever's happening, to just begin with that assumption, whatever that wild experience is, it's serving to help our souls develop and evolve. It's helping us get to where we need to go. That's what I like to see with this. So just having that sense of trust to me is big. Okay. The other thing about eclipses is that we know that it's about shadow work, and that's very visceral. It's like in the natural world, there's this concept of the law of signatures in ancient herbology, where you can look at a particular plant and look at the shape of its leaf or the shape of its root, and you can understand that that plant has, maybe it's the same shape as an organ of the body, right? Like look at a walnut, it looks like the shape of the brain, for example. The law of signatures says that's not random. There are um, there are shapes. There's a hint there at a harmony and a co-creative potential between those energies and those beings. So same with the night sky. When you look at the moon and the sun and the earth and what happens during the eclipses, literally at a solar eclipse like this one, what's happening is that um, the moon's shadow is crossing in front of the sun. And so you're basically seeing the sun, our great light in the sky, our beautiful star, our source of energy and fuel and plasma. This is a whole other conversation. The beautiful living sun, though, our source of light, is being blocked by the moon. So we're this light in the middle of the sky is going out, and the sky becomes more darkened. And so clearly there's some kind of a shadow work we're being invited to do. We're invited, it's very sacred timing. You can just feel it, that we're invited to go within. We're invited to drop in and to connect into the void, connect into what is hidden, what is in the unconscious, what we maybe can't see in the light of consciousness normally. So there's shadow work that we're working with. And then at a lunar eclipse, of course, which we went through about 2 weeks ago, that's when the moon, the shadow of the earth is cast on the face of the moon. So it's understood that, okay, yeah. So there's the shadow work that we're invited to do, and you can feel it during an eclipse. I mean, I hear from so many people now who are so tuned in. They're like, oh my God, it's another eclipse. Big stuff happened in the last one. What's going to happen in this one, right? So it's no joke. It's a time of massive change and shifting. And again, if we can do the shadow work internally, if we can set our intention over the course of the eclipse portal to really be dropping into the themes that are presented during this time and asked to be shown where we are wanting and needing to come into greater balance, then we're going to experience a lot more gifts from this experience. Okay, so then a simple way to look at it is to say that lunar eclipses are super full moons. So all the things we know about full moons, that it's a time of celebration, it's a time of culmination. It's like also it's the beginning, it's the tipping point where we're going from a period of growth into beginning a period of releasing. There's a lot we could talk about with the full moon. Well, a lunar eclipse, because it's lined up more precisely, is just amplifies the energies of the full moon. So treat it like a full moon, but amplified. That's a very simple way to work with it. Solar eclipses are super new moons. So again, there's the sun, the moon, and the earth are lined up like a lock and a key. So it's a really powerful time to plant seeds and all of these kinds of things. All right. So one other feature of eclipses, and of course there's a million more, but this is what I'm going to focus on. And this has to do with dragon medicine. So this is, of course, the year of the dragon. And so the dragon energies are big, and eclipses carry dragon medicine. That's just for fun to talk about. I'm actually going to veer away for a moment from my slide to just say the way I see it with the dragon energies of the eclipse is that in East Asian astrology, often the North Node is seen as the head of the dragon, and the South Node is seen as the tail of the dragon. And what that refers to is that the North Node is the region. It has to do with the orbit between the sun and the moon and the northern extreme of that. And the South Node is the orbit between the sun and the moon and the southern extreme of that. And so, literally, when the dragon eats, it's like the dragon eats the sun. That has to do with when the moon meets the sun in that alignment. So you don't see the sun anymore, right? So if you can imagine, I like to think of it that the ancients were so tuned into the sky that even though we can't see or feel this with our bodies now, they would have understood, and even almost like they could see where the moon is making this kind of dragon or snake pattern in the sky. So here's the sun along the ecliptic line. So here's the sun along the ecliptic line, and then here's the moon kind of going to the north and the south of the line of the sun, like a dragon or a snake. And then when it meets the sun, it's like eating the sun, right? That's dragon energy. There are a lot of other reasons to think about the eclipse as dragon energy, but when we think of dragons in a beneficent way, like this is an empowering experience, then I find that to be most helpful. Okay, so the South Node is understood to be about composting the past or releasing or letting go of something. It was given the transmission in 2019, I believe, when the South Node was in Capricorn, that at its highest expression, if you work with the South Node collectively in this way, I was seeing the most beneficial way of working with the South Node is almost to see it like, I was seeing it like a little spade, or I've just got a spade in front of me, actually, like a little trowel or a spade, where you're dropping deeper, deeper, deeper through the layers of the soil. And as you do, you're going to encounter some muck, you're going to encounter some stuff you don't like, but you're going to get down into the good nutrients and minerals. You could see it as the root of a tree as well. You're going to get down into some really potent, beautiful fuel and energies that you can pull up from the past. So you're going, again, it's about timelines. I didn't talk about that enough, but I'll talk about that in a minute. So you're with the South Node, you're starting at the 29 degrees of that sign, whatever it's in, for the entire period of time that the nodes are in a particular sign, which is about close to 2 years. So the South Node, so again, the eclipse is going to either be with the North Node or a South Node. I should say that. So the South Node in a particular sign, it has to do with going down deep and exploring the lineage of that sign. What's there? What's the history of that sign? How have people experienced that sign historically? And finding the richness and the depth and the treasure in the below, in the deeper layers of that sign. And of course, yes, we're having to work through the muck of the shadow, the distortion, the corruption, the inversion around that sign. And those are the kinds of themes that come up in an eclipse, right? So we're going to talk about what the signs are, what the sign is that's associated with this eclipse of the South Node. Okay, and then so the South Node, when an eclipse is with the South Node, it has to do with composting the past, bringing up the treasure, and healing the distortions from the past that have to do with that astrological sign. And then the North Node is about the head of the dragon is about activating the highest future timeline. Okay, so so it has to do with how can we use what we already know and then leap into this greater future collectively together. So when the eclipse is with the North Node, it's seen as being more forward moving. When the eclipse is with the South Node, it's more about tuning into the past and healing whatever needs to be healed and reconciled from the past. And again, I'm going to say too about eclipses that they do have to do, and we can feel this, they cause time to move differently. And so there is the opportunity, number one, just to kind of give yourself a little grace about that it's just a time that moves differently. And also the number two is it's also about taking advantage of that it's a very good time to play with, again, these new concepts, ancient new concepts of jumping timelines or of that's a little tree frog is not the cutest little thing ever. Jumping timelines and or collapsing timelines. There's a lot of ways to talk about that because more and more as our science is beginning to catch up with what indigenous and ancient wisdom has always known. Concept like, quantum, the whole quantum realm, what we understand about that now and are beginning to understand. New concepts like what is plasma, the fourth element, or new concepts like what is our light body, or all these kinds of things that are waking up right now very fast. Anyway, I'm getting off track, but the eclipses, all eclipses, give us an opportunity to work with time creatively, I will say. And so that's also why it is good to set intentions. And it's also good to understand that the way that intention plays out is probably going to, again, surprise us. So be ready, hold your horses, and maybe also ask for gentleness if you want that, or ask for whatever it takes, depending on where you're at in your journey. And know the universe is listening. Divine is listening. All right. So an annular eclipse specifically is also called a ring of fire eclipse, is one where it's not considered technically to be a full total solar eclipse. It is a super new moon solar eclipse, but it's not considered total. It's considered a partial eclipse, technically, but it's a really specific, very interesting, and very visually powerful solar eclipse where it just so happens that the moon is, because of its distance from the sun and the earth, it's positioned so that it doesn't completely cover the face of the sun. And so often there's a ring of fire. Sometimes, like last October 14th, what I noticed wasn't, it didn't fully completely, it did cover one side more than the other. So it wasn't a complete ring. I'll be curious to see what this one looks like. Not that I'm in South America, but online. Anyway, so it's a ring of fire effect. And again, there's the law of signatures, or I'm probably using that a little out of its context, but just to say that the way we see things standing on the earth in the sky has to do with the way this energy is playing out in the world, in the earthly realm. It's the universe operates through symbolic language, so we're learning to pay attention to that. And so when we look at that, look at this, there's this ring of fire, And I'm actually going to take us back to the beginning. I like this one almost better. I should have used this one. Um, and so when you've got this ring of fire, there are a lot of ways, and you tune into it for a second. You know, what do you see with the ring of fire? We get to play, we get to create. It's so good to use our imagination. I'm convinced more and more this is what we're needing, is to remember how to use our imagination. And so as a ring of fire, what is it? Can we see it as, you know, Kaylin Castell, who is one of my original mentors and teachers and then collaborator, um, she likes to speak of it as a cauldron. I love that idea of the cauldron. And we can certainly see an eclipse as a cauldron where it's this container where magic happens, and where we can really put all of our dreams, visions, and goals and then see what happens, this magical concoction. We don't know. We can see it as I've been seeing it. I've been reminded of COVID, interestingly, and the corona, you know, the coronavirus. And as weird as this may sound, and I know there's a gazillion ideas about what COVID was about, where it originated, the vaccine, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'm going to go with the theory that regardless of any of that, that there was something about COVID that was a necessary wake up and support of our evolutionary development. And I think that that's how many humans took it. Um, Meaning, yes, there was a lot of darkness and a lot that was revealed that was important to be revealed, and that's continuing to play out and that we're paying attention to. And also, I was just struck by the corona, right? Corona, there's a crown. There's a crown. And so I think that idea of the corona or the crown, whether it's a flower crown or a golden crown, whatever it is, to me, it's this deeper symbology that has to do with sovereignty and power. And who wears the crown? I want to live in a moment where everyone wears this crown. And the crown, what is a crown? A crown is something that connects us to our divinity, connects us to our divine source. So, from my perspective, we can also see it as a crown. So, and of course, I feel that's why I called it, that's why I think of this as a portal. It's a portal, right? We move through the eclipse and even the eclipse window into a portal where time moves differently, where we're more in quantum, where everything's more malleable. And so, that's very, very exciting in some way for those of us who like to play with dimensions and time. So yes, finally we could say it's a portal. So I think it's a crown, it's a cauldron, it's a portal that we can work with. Okay. All right. Okay. Let's see if there's anything. Okay. So a few of the features of this eclipse are that we have featured this, and this is so interesting. Part of what I want to talk about is that it's a fascinating reality that we live in a moment where, because of the precession, because of the tilt and wobble of the earth that has this impact, where we are at these various equinox and solstice points, our sun is going to pass through each of the 12 constellations along the ecliptic. Because of that, it takes 26,000 years for the sun to move through each of the constellations. And we live in a moment where, when we talk about the sign, like the sign of Libra, which is this eclipse, it's important to know that the sign and the constellation are two different things. I'm not going to go into all of that, but just understand they're two different things. The Hellenistic Greeks would have said, you need to consider what is the seasonal sign and what is the star, or what are the constellations behind it. Both things need to be considered. So we happen, and to me, that when we consider that, again, that has to do with understanding the time we're living in, the age change that we're in the midst of, and the kind of consciousness that's being awoken within us. So it just so happens this is the Virgin or the Virgo constellation in the sky. It's one of the biggest constellations in the sky. It is the priestess, the goddess. It could be seen as Astrea or Nike. There are a lot of ways to tell the story of who this goddess in the sky is. But in her waist is Porima. It's the star of prophecy. So that's where the sun's going to be. It's going to be with Porima. That's very interesting, right? So the star of prophecy, this is something Kaylin has also written about that I think is wonderful. and done a YouTube on, so I highly recommend it. And so, but what's fascinating is that when the sun is moving, or any planet's moving through the sign of Libra at this time, it's moving through the Virgin, the goddess in the sky. And so it's like our, at this moment, our way of being in right relationship and coming back into reciprocity and all of those Libra themes is informed by this reemergence of the feminine to balance the masculine. So that's just the time we're living in. And Astrea, who actually, the asteroid Astrea is a very similar energy. Some would say that the Virgo, that she is also Astrea. So that's the sovereign feminine. She is the feminine principle, the goddess. So the goddess is very present in this moment. And what's also interesting is Astrea is seen as the goddess of justice. And so the sign that has to do with right relationship and peacemaking is moving through the constellation. It's justice in the tarot is Astrea, or is this goddess. And so we really have to ask ourselves, what does justice look and feel like in this current moment that we're living in? How can we be that change we want to see in the world, and be a bring about justice in our own personal lives? It might start with justice, meaning that if we haven't valued ourselves enough, that we value ourselves more, so that we have an internal sense of justice and coherence. But I find it fascinating that there are all these themes around the goddess of justice. And I'm going to bring up as well something that I'm going to talk more about. I've decided I'm going to do at least one course and maybe a series around restoring the spiritual blueprint for the US, because I think it's time. I think that's needed. It's something I began that project in 2017, and it obviously we're in a moment where we need it again. And so we've got on the top of the Capitol Dome in DC. Most people still do not know this, but there is a statue that is referred to as the Lady of Freedom, and she is an indigenous woman. It's very, very interesting. I'm going to talk about another very significant indigenous woman who had a major role to play in the founding of the US, and there are many. But I want to just bring some awareness right now. I'm going to do other courses on Lady Freedom. I'm going to bring in Katya Miller, a friend from many years ago in New Mexico, who has dedicated her life over the last 20 plus years to helping people remember who this Lady Freedom is, so that we can really bring our awareness to this hidden and little talked about seed of consciousness that has been intended to infuse the awareness, the consciousness, the intelligence of the US as a nation. But I just want to presence her now. Also another form of freedom or justice that we need to tune into at this moment. Okay, and then again, this has to do with shadow work. I find it fascinating that this eclipse is conjunct Black Moon Lilith. Now, Lilith, there are two, anytime we talk about an asteroid, we're talking about the goddess, or a goddess, an asteroid named by after a goddess. We're talking about the goddess herself. And in mythology, because there is this understanding in astrology that most of the time, this is one of those interesting phenomena. Most of the time, even though astronomers love to make fun of astrologers, and that is changing in some ways, the moment that we see or discover a new object in the sky corresponds to a moment when that specific energy or frequency is waking up in the human consciousness. And it just so happens astronomers, who are probably like closeted astrologers, most of them, from past lives, they happen in their brilliance to come up with a name that does correspond to the kind of themes that this planetary body carries. It's just how it works. It's and you'll see it show up again and again. It's very real. Black Moon Lilith is not a planetary body, however. Black Moon Lilith has to do with it is the anti-center of our moon in its orbit. The opposite center to the moon is Black Moon. So it's a point in space. It's kind of a void, a black void in the sky that has tremendous significance nonetheless. And so we can talk about that point in space and what it has to do with. You could see it as the void. You could see it as the unconscious. You could see it as this deeper. I see it as the void when it comes to the planetary aspect or the celestial aspect. It has to do with that void, that nigredo, that aspect of where it is that we get to give birth to new ideas, new concepts. I see it on that level at one as one aspect of what it is. But also carries the qualities of the mythic Lilith, who has been cast into darkness, who has been made to be seen as a negatively dark figure in our Western tradition. So Lilith, my sense of Lilith, first of all, I love her. And if you know the story of Lilith, we first learn about her from the Hebrew Bible, where she was seen as being the first wife of Adam. Now, what's interesting about Lilith is that in these Hebrew scriptures, she and Adam were both made out of the earth, the soil of the earth. So they were made as equals and of the same stuff. They would have been perfect mates, right? However, Adam wanted her to submit to him. And as the feminine principle, she refused. She refused to submit to the masculine. And we have to understand that Lilith came from the Sumerian. She was a figure from ancient Sumer. So she came way before the Bible. And so as this ancient feminine figure, what happened between her and Adam had to do with this larger story of where we were shifting from a matriarchal to a patriarchal age. So she is a remnant from that pre-patriarchal age where she said, no, I'm not going along with this. I will not be beneath you. And so that's Lilith. And then, of course, she was demonized. She was made to be this negative, horrific feminine figure and she was highly sexualized. And then instead she was replaced with Eve. And Eve, of course, has to do with that distortion. She comes from Adam's rib, much like Athena comes from Zeus's head, much like Sekhmet comes from Ra's eye. You know, these patriarchal stories about the goddess who comes from inside the masculine. And so where that she doesn't have her own sovereignty, she is simply a projection or a extension of the masculine without her own true form or state of being, right? I'm not saying good or bad, but this is how the feminine, how we as women often experience ourselves, whether we know it or not. We are part of the matrix of this masculine energy, and part of our need right now is sovereignty, to know ourselves as sovereign beings. So Black Moon Lilith is in the sign of Libra right now, and it's conjunct this eclipse in Libra. And so when I feel into this, what I was feeling is that it could have to do with a representation of it. It could be the potential for healing the split between masculine and feminine, a reconciliation of true harmony between the masculine and feminine restored. The reason I say that is because sacred union is all over the place right now in terms of what it is that we as a humanity and as our current collective is wanting and needing. It is sacred union within ourselves. It's the healing of the binary. It's moving beyond the polarization of extremes. There's the need of that. And where would it first happen? Of course, but between the yin and the yang, the feminine and the masculine. So I say that because to me, it feels like we know the sign of Libra in its original essence has to do with equal, conscious, non-hierarchical partnership. It has to do with the relationship between two equals, which is where true love can flourish. And so my sense is that maybe, and I'm going to pray into this and dream into this, that this eclipse is seeding the potential for true reconciliation between the genders of men and women, and between the energies of the feminine and masculine, the yin and the yang within each individual, which I would say I feel, and that those in the queer community, including trans, including the full spectrum of non-binary, are on the leading edge of that for us. That's my feeling, is that they are on the leading edge of helping us to understand those poles of masculine and feminine and learn to bring them into an alive harmony within us. Okay. And when I look at this beautiful being, I want to say this is on a side. So you'll see there's 3 different layers of Lilith as I see her. And as the mythic figure, you know, this is called the Bernie relief. And some would say it's Inanna, some would say it's Ishtar, some would say it's Lilith. I actually see it as Lilith, but I actually think that Inanna is Lilith, that Inanna is who Lilith became when she became, in quote, civilized. That's my feeling. So Lilith, what I find interesting about this image of her and who I feel and see her to be is as a nature spirit. I see her as having been a guardian, an earth guardian, a nature spirit. And the reason I say that is because, again, she's part animal, part human. She's chimeric. She is not purely human. She is connected to the natural world and the forces of nature. And so she offers us a bridge. And I love that about her. You can look at her horns, the horns that connect into the matriarchal goddess religions of the bull. And when we think about the bull, why do we see the bull as the feminine? Why is the age of Taurus about the feminine? Well, the bull's head is like a uterus, right? That's one of the reasons of many. Also that there is there's a lot of layers to that. So there's the horns, there we have her wings, her owl's talons, and the owl's here, and then of course the lions, which always have that connection to the goddess. And part of the reason I say she's Inanna as well is, Inanna has those lions as well at her feet, as does probably Astrea, and many goddesses do. So I love Lilith because when we look at the Western deities that underpin Western modern civilization, they reflect our human supremacy. They're pure humans. They don't have often they don't have a connection to the larger natural world. If you go to Mesoamerica, you're going to see that their deities have a connection to snakes or to birds or to lightning or rainbows or the moon, or they're all these other things. And so my sense with her is that she is taking us back. She offers us a doorway into pre-patriarchal civilization of the lands of Sumer, where the Western modern culture was born. And I feel when we drop deeper into what those societies and communities were like prior to patriarchy, then we will receive deep medicine. So I think she offers us a doorway into that. Okay, so now we get to explore what is the Libra South Node, because this eclipse itself is with the South Node, and of course the eclipse is in the sign of Libra. So this eclipse itself that's why I call it's the awakening of the peacemakers, is because this eclipse is all about activating Libra themes. And it's with the South Node. So what's the original essence? I say when it's the South Node, what was the original essence of Libra? And what is the essence? I always ask that with every sign. What was the original essence? There's a timeless element to each of the signs, each of the sacred humans, the 12 sacred humans represented by the signs. There's the primacy of the bond, kinship, community, connection, relationship, belonging. That's what Libra offers. It's the glue that holds together the community and our closest relationships and the village. Libra has to do with honoring every place around the wheel. So healthy Libra can see all the 12 ways of being and all the many ways of being, and deeply honors the uniqueness and the sovereignty and the authenticity of every different way of being a human or a more than human being. And then it's also the art of peacemaking, of mediation, of diplomacy. So those are all some of the qualities. And then, as I'd mentioned before, what Libra wants more than anything is to be in equal conscious, non-hierarchical relationship with others. Reciprocity is a huge theme around Libra. Can you tell that Libra is a medicine in its original essence and in its healthiest expression that we need right now? Can you feel that? So within the Lakota traditions, the Lakota Sioux of Native America, they use the phrase aho mitakuye. My apologies if I don't say it correctly. I always struggle with it. What that means is all my relations. And it's a deep honoring of all of my relations, all the peoples all around us, including the tree peoples and the plants and the animals and the winds and the elements and all of the beings, including all of the other humans. So that's, again, this is an older culture than the one that is has for a longer period of time been in connection with the earth and her cycles. And they have that as one of the core principles of the way that they operate, of their cultural gifts and wisdoms that we are so lucky to receive through that concept. And then there are the peacemaker stories of the Haudenosaunee, or the Iroquois Confederacy in the New York and in the northeast of the US and Canada. The Haudenosaunee, or they call themselves that, they were also known as the Iroquois Confederacy. They tell these beautiful stories that I'm going to talk about at the end of this presentation, because they're so important for our moment. But they are also, they help us understand the original essence of Libra and the gifts of Libra. And I speak about all this again because it's a Libra South Node. So again, we get to dip down deep and tune into the deeper wisdoms of the sign. So at the turning of the ages, what is the Libra wound or distortion that needs healing? So it's longing for community and connection. Many of us are longing for that. And I think we long for that connection inside of ourselves, meaning that we can make peace with the different parts of us. We long for a connection with the larger natural world because we're often in a bubble where we're disconnected from that, on our screens and et cetera, et cetera. And thank you, screen. Thank you for the gift of that. And also knowing there are imbalances often. Isolation. So many people are isolated, and it causes tremendous pain. We're not made to be so isolated. And then there's grief and I think the woodpecker is agreeing with me. There's grief and rage over the violence, wars, and devastations of community in the earth. I mean, we look around. Are you not feeling that rage? I am feeling it. And I mean rage fueled in love for the whole of us and what's happened to us, and absolute, I'm just absolutely over it, in terms of the pain we're causing to each other. And the fact that so much of it comes from the government of this nation that had it, that does have bloodshed at the very root, and yet also I will always believe has had the potential to mend and heal those wounds and to be something much greater, in part because we are informed by the immigrants and because we are informed by the wisdom of the African American intelligence and wisdom and gifts of those cultures, and because of the wisdom of the indigenous peoples here, as well as all of our ancestors and the wisdom that they carry. So the Libra wound, it's the violence, to see Libra is a peacemaker. Libra wants to live in a place of harmony and peace, a golden age, and this has been a dark time. Widespread debt and the growing gap between haves and have-nots. Again, that really violates the matrix or the coherence that we're needing as community. That we are so separated from one another and each other because of that. The codependence or people pleasing in order to belong, that is a shadow side of Libra. And I think that it's so severe because so few people have actually experienced unconditional love and a very, very strong visceral bond with their parents or their caretakers or anyone who absolutely loved without condition, and not because of what you can produce or but truly soul to soul love and connection. And so, and even if you have that as a child, that there's so many layers of the current reality where and we're healing that, right? But I think that the codependence and people pleasing to belong is part of what we've been challenging. Need for greater tools and awareness and forums to learn to engage and work through conflicts with each other and within ourselves. We're really, some of us have lost, maybe we don't trust our bond strongly enough to be able to actually say what we think and be honest about it. I know that has often been true for me. So we're afraid, we're conflict averse, and so we don't deepen our relationships. Okay, then there's media disinformation favoring profit over connection. It's just they're trying to make a bunch of money through shock and awe and through separation and division. We see it, feel it. Whether it's a conspiracy or whether it's just about money, like so many things are, it almost doesn't matter. We know that there's something about the frequencies and energies that we take in when we listen to that, where it just harms our nervous system, and it takes us to the lowest takes us into distortion, a lack of coherence, which we don't need right now. And then there's human supremacy, which is not taking account of rights of nature, not taking account of the larger community we belong to. So those are some of the distortions that we as humans have been kind of living through as this age of separation has been carrying forward. Um, and there are gifts in this time we're coming out of, beautiful gifts and ways we've evolved that I think need to be honored. But these are some of the costs. Okay, and then the emergent Libra qualities and trends can include we are learning about codependence and attachment styles and all this. So it's this massive eruption right now. Think what you will of our therapeutic realities, and maybe we overuse that, certainly in ways, of course we do. But I would say that what we're learning about attachment, codependence, these kinds of things is very essential to help us heal so that we can come into deeper, intimate, authentic connectedness, which is what Libra really wants. And then the rights of nature movement, that's something that's been spreading all across South America and in other regions of the world. And we are in Mexico, and we here in the US are starting to catch up slightly. Where some of you may know that a number of years ago, there was legislation that was passed that would legally give corporations personhood, behaving, acting as if corporations have the same rights as a human being. And so what many of us would say now is, well, a river has rights as a human being does. Not only that, but we rely as humans on the river. So rights of nature is a rebalancing and a bringing back into reciprocity and a mutual acknowledgement of our relations. Books like The Dawn of Everything, that is a wonderful book I recommend. It tells a different story of civilization. It helps us understand not just these kind of utopic golden ages like what we think of with Atlantis, though I think it's fascinating and I think it's really wonderful to explore what golden ages might have looked like historically. But what's wonderful about that book is that it shows us that even not that long ago, and even currently, in any given age or time, there are going to be different consciousnesses and different kinds of cultures and communities that emerge all over the place. And one example that I love from the book was in Teotihuacan, which is a very sacred region in Mexico, that there was a culture that emerged there near the same time as the Aztec and Mayan empires. But in this society, this community, there was a choice made to be more egalitarian, more communitarian than these very stratified hierarchical cultures. So I really recommend reading books like that and finding other resources that would help us broaden our imagination and our understanding so that we move beyond this idea that, well, humans have always been this way. We've always been violent. We've always been, stratified and hierarchical, and men and women have always been, at each other's throats or separated. Well, no, that's not true, actually. And more research is coming out to support that. So how we show up in local communities and on the land to repair our relationship with each other in real time is part of what we're exploring now. Many of us, and it's kind of like we got to unthaw to do it. It's not comfortable. The relationships with our neighbors, with our family, with our closest friends, well, they're not easy. There's a lot there. That's the deepest spiritual work. And let me tell you, it's not my comfort zone. But it's where the magic happens too, and granted, this is kind of a Cancer and a Gemini sorts of themes that we're talking about here. Okay. And then there are sanctuaries and spaces also. I see that this is somewhat Libra and also Cancerian. That, for example, I've talked about this before, but over the last year, and back and forth between New Mexico and Missouri, I met a wonderful couple who had gotten these visitations from Mary, Mother Mary, in her manifestation as Our Lady of Light. And she directed them to get land. She helped them find it and through all these miracles and synchronicities. And she gave them the charge to build a sanctuary. They didn't have the money. She helped them find it. She said, money's nothing to me. And the directives for the sanctuary, which are beautiful, they're on the Merrimack River south of St. Louis. right by where I grew up. And she's the directive is you don't charge money. You just let people come. They call the place Glennis. And she said, don't advertise, but my little roses will come. They'll know, they'll find me. And this is not new. She's been showing up across many countries and cultures as an expression of the feminine divine who's always been with us and always created these spaces of sanctuary. So that's very Libra and the level that, here are these spaces where everyone's welcome, very inclusive. Okay. All right. Now, let's see. Okay. All right. And I've started to talk about this a little bit. But part of what feels real clear with this eclipse that I mentioned before is we've got Black Moon Lilith, we've got Algol, the demon star, and the forehead of Medusa. And the fact that it's a eclipse, an annular solar eclipse, so clearly shadow work is required. And it's in the sign of Libra, so the shadow work, of course, is probably going to show up in your closest relationships. And it's going to show up in the collective in terms of where is justice and where is peace and where is injustice showing up. So we're going to have to look at it. Have we not been looking at it since the annular solar eclipse of October 14th and before? Because often we feel the effect of the eclipse before and on October 7th. I would absolutely say that what happened on the 7th didn't come out of a vacuum. What happened on the 7th came from many, many years of massive suppression of a people. And I say that with tremendous compassion and love and an honoring of the story of the Jewish people and what brought them there to Israel. And the great people, people say it's not complex. And I know what they mean by that, because I absolutely think that what's happening in Palestine is absolutely wrong. What's happened to the people in Palestine. And it's tragic to me because, again, it's another example of passing on the wound. It is colonial, settler. It's what happens. It's what's happened. And, I even use those terms with some reluctance, because sometimes I think when you use terms that are just like, well, this puts you in this camp or this puts you in that camp. And also, I think when you say we're settlers, I think there can be something better to say about that, because I think every ancestor, every human that lives on a land and loves it needs to be honored. And there's a both and, that the people who lived there before and the stories of who they were needs to be honored. And when we get to see in real time what's happening and has been happening to a population of people who have been harmed deeply by the increased incursions of the Israeli settlements and people who were imported onto those lands to establish a population, to maintain that presence for global power purposes. Truly, it is a tragic thing for the Israelis. It's a tragic thing for the Jewish people, many of whom across the globe, it is the Jewish community who has been most vocally objecting to the horrors that have been playing out in Gaza. And so we're having to look at that shadow. It is absolutely essential to look at that shadow and to hold it with a heart that is full of love and compassion for everyone involved and for the land, for that land that has seen so much bloodshed. And when I was in Ireland, Eru is the name of the goddess who embodies the land of Ireland. And I thought, what is the name of the land of Palestine, of Israel, Palestine? What is the goddess who embodies that? Is it two goddesses? Is it more than one sovereignty goddess who embodies and personifies that land? And look at what she's gone through. And how can we, as a collective humanity, pour our love and our compassion and our grief into that region to help heal what's been happening, because it connects to all of us. We're all connected. And what's really at stake is the attachment that we have to empire and to the way that we think that benefits us. And perhaps it does benefit us, and yet perhaps we simply find ourselves in a moment that keeps repeating, where we are moving from empire back into a connectedness to the land and to each other. And that's the way the cycle works. Moving from hierarchy into more horizontal. Clearly, Pluto moving into Aquarius has to do with that theme. So I'm not going to break each of these things down because I know I'm going longer than I had planned. I'll talk a little more about Medusa at the end. Okay, so I wanted to share a little bit, just some tools for you to support you personally for this eclipse. And here's one I'm going to recommend. I'm going to invite you to explore. That the nodes moved into Aries Libra in July 17th of 2023. So that's when, excuse me, the South Node moved into 29 Libra. And so from that point, it's been steadily moving down through all the degrees. So then it's about 10 degrees Libra at the time of this eclipse. And so here's the question personally, the most empowering question I can think to ask. We've all been doing work around codependence, around being in a more reciprocal relationship with each other, with the land, with our community, with our families, with a community of life. So how am I more sovereign, and how am I more skillful in the art of an intimate relationship? And how have I been working through that since July of 2023? And you know what I want to include here that I didn't write, and it's interesting how I did not. Where are the themes of reciprocity with my community, with the people around me, and with the land around me? Where have I been waking up to how I can live in greater balance and reciprocity, whether that's through prayer and land offerings and or giving back in my community through volunteering or picking up trash or tending to joining a nonprofit that is taking care of the lands and the waters and soils around me. Where has that reciprocity grown in me, and where do I want it to grow more? So how have I grown? What has it taken to mature in all these areas? And let's celebrate and honor our growth so far. I think that's absolutely vital. Um, and then we can take it a step further, since this is an eclipse, and we can do some timeline bending, timeline collapsing, meaning that we can know that there are many different timelines that we have taken personally and collectively. And there are some that we as a nation certainly might wish that there were a different outcome. We can think about the history of the US, and one of the timelines I like to imagine is that we really literally did adopt two of the main principles that the Haudenosaunee, like many other indigenous peoples, carried. One was of the leadership of the clan mothers. I'm going to talk a little more about that in a moment. That there were these wise women, and the way I see them is that they're the ones who had the deepest root into the wisdom of the ancestors. Really beautiful, timeless wisdom from their traditions from the past. They're also the ones who have the high vision. They're multidimensional, so they actually literally have the vision so that they can be in communication with the future ancestors, 7 generations in the future, and bringing back information. They're dreamers, they're seers, there's oracles, to understand how is this choice that we're making here as a council, as a government, as a legislator, how is this impacting the next 7 generations and Mother Earth, right? So if Benjamin Franklin and the other founders who were really enamored with the Haudenosaunee and how well they functioned as separate bodies working together, if they really would have taken seriously and could have even seen, which they probably couldn't see, the leadership of the women, then we would have adopted that kind of thing. We would have had wise women, elders in the community who were helping to make these decisions. And they also would have integrated the 7th generational principle that, again, any decision made would consider how it would impact the earth and the future generations. So my ideal timeline would be that the founders of the country actually took that into consideration. So when we talk about timelines, we might know that there are parallel paths that could have been taken. And when we collapse timelines, we really let ourselves explore and play with what might that have felt like? How could that have been? And then we invite in a reality that integrates what's happening now and brings forward how could our lives be now if that other reality we would have experienced that, right? So here are some questions. If I were fully whole, healed, empowered, sovereign, and connected to the realm of relationship, what wild, beautiful life would I be living? How would I be embodying my calling? Put yourself there in that future timeline and feel how it feels to be living your most beautiful life, fully empowered and connected. Move backwards through time to catch a glimpse of some of the actions you took, events that took place to take you there. Bring that feeling and experience back into your body now. Wow. So play with that. Come back to this, play with that. I'm not going to take you through this as a meditation, although I might do a separate meditation. I'll see. But what I will say that's fascinating to me is that when I wrote all of this, I hadn't integrated the parts around reciprocity and connectedness with the larger nature community. So I would add to that with that timeline bending, collapsing in my personal life. If I were really very engaged in my local community and with the lands around me and the spirits of the land around me in a way that felt so harmonious and alive that my soul was just singing. And I knew that I was very actively helping create a reality that will be beneficial for the ancestors and from the earth. How would that look? How would that feel? And then move backward from there. We're very lonely as a species. We're needing to remember to reconnect. And that is happening. One thing I learned in Ireland for sure is it's already underway. All right. So how do we become peacemakers? And this is more of a collective question. My sense still continues to be that it starts within, to become aware of the members of my inner council, like who lives inside of me, what are those voices? And I think cut off too much of the external voices if you can, um, from the talking heads and the news outlets. Like take in just enough, a homeopathic dose that you know what's going on, but don't do it so much that you lose track of your own inner wisdom. Um, Include your ancestral council, really connect to your ancestors, give them space to speak, and, see where that war is, because if we're seeing war and violence out there, it's happening in here. So become intimately familiar with where that conflict is happening between the parts of yourself. There's parts work, there's IFS work, a lot of tools that we can use. And if you don't have resources or time or energy that you feel to use those, to access those services, because many don't, let's be real. It literally can even be about taking the time to identify what are the parts of yourself that often have conflict. And I'll just say, for example, I've become very intimately familiar recently with, I read the whole history of the religious tradition that I was raised in, and that my grandfather actually, my great grandfather, had founded a church. He was a visionary. He founded a primitive Baptist church in the Ozarks. And this was a very important part of my upbringing. And so recently at my mom's, I read the whole history, and it's like part history, part myth of the primitive Baptists. And it was fascinating. And to see how deeply they were persecuted was really interesting to me, and how that sense of persecution, and it's not safe, and the world is an unsafe place to be, and be quiet, keep your head down, or else you'll be murdered. It was a very strong theme, and that it helped me have a lot of compassion for my mom and for my ancestors, for where that came from. It felt very Cancerian, very protective, like the shadow of the U.S. is very Cancerian, and very protective. What is that Israel just did to Lebanon? What do they call that? Preemptive. Yeah, I think you're going to hurt me, so I'm going to hurt you first. Wow. Just wow. What is that doing in our world? Just wow. Fucking pisses me off. Sorry, I'm angry about it. And I'm tired of it. And the mothers inside of me, my ancestors, honestly, are also tired of it. So one of my parts is the persecuted one, who's very afraid. And I have other parts as well, many other parts. So, oof, there they are, alive inside of me. Thank you. I've been getting in touch with my anger. Thank you so much. We need that for our aliveness. How do we become peacemakers? We remember our true divine nature. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. We learn from the land itself and the indigenous voices from that land. We listen to indigenous voices, including learning some of the words and the seed words and the songs of the people who originally lived in our lands. I actually think that's incredibly important. There are codes in that our land needs, that we can sing to the lands where we live. And I mean no disrespect, but where I live, people are not singing those songs. So I need to learn them. And my longer goal is to help bring more people onto the land who originally lived and passed through here. And of course, to honor our own ancestors, like all the people who lived on this land, who loved it, honor them all. This isn't about separating us from each other. This is honoring everyone who has experienced tremendous difficulty to help us to be here today. All of our ancestors went through so much. Love all of them. Love all of them. Make peace with our ancestors, and then to learn from the peacemaker in Hiawatha and Jigon Sase and Tadorado. Tadodadaho. Oh God, I am sorry. I'm sure I'm butchering that. So the reason I bring this is because today I had this really interesting realization. Um, since Uranus has been activating the Medusa star, I've been really working with her, and I have a friend who's been beautiful artist who has been doing a lot of alchemical work with Medusa. And I'm curious about what that is all about. And so I was doing a little more research into the stories from the Haudenosaunee. Um, and again, the Haudenosaunee were a confederacy of 5 and then 6 tribes in the northeastern part of Turtle Island, northeastern US and Canada, including the Mohawk, the Onondaga, and the Huron, and I cannot remember all of them. But they, back in about the 1100s, according to some, these warring tribes came together and they together formed this great law of peace. And some of the sacred figures to them are the white pine tree. There's a white pine tree right in front of me, and I love that. I think about that every time I make offerings. Um, and in any case, the stories of so the stories they tell now about the times leading up to the establishment of the Great Law of Peace, they tell of a time much like what we're going through right now. We can talk about 5,000-year ages, but there are also smaller ages within the larger ages where certain cultures and communities can show us that we can choose different ways, and we can choose a higher and a better, more congruent way. So the stories tell that the Confederates, that these tribes, these 5 warring tribes, were very violent, that they had fallen into darkness, that they had forgotten their own divine light. And Robert Moss, who's one of my key teachers, he's a core teacher for me. I studied deeply with him over many years. Um, his dream, he was charged with restoring a dreaming culture in modern society by a Mohawk female elder in a dream. And he he wrote books of fiction, and he did a lot of work with the Iroquois or the Haudenosaunee and studying their dreaming culture. And he tells a beautiful version of the story um, of the peacemaker Hiawatha and Hiawatha, because these stories that the Haudenosaunee tell about how they came to find this peace are really instrumental for us right now. Okay, so they would say that they had fallen into a dark time, and the people were so distorted that they had become cannibalistic. And so in the story, then what happens is that there is a figure who arrives, and he's much like a Christ figure. And I mean like historical Jesus, a rabble rouser and a peacemaker and someone who is going to shake up the norms to bring about more peace and justice and to heal the hearts of the people so that they can create a more harmonious and balanced culture. And so this peacemaker arrives, and he, according to some versions of the story, when he arrives, Hiawatha himself, who would become the main protagonist, he was literally sitting in front of a pot of soup. Here's the ring of fire cauldron, right? There's that theme. He was sitting in front of a pot of meat that was literally his neighbor. He was eating his neighbor who he had killed. That's the depth of depravity that he'd come to, right? So he's eating his neighbor. And he clearly was in this darkness. He had gone to the depths of darkness in terms of human nature. When the peacemaker stood above him as this being of light. And so all of a sudden, in the waters of this pot, Hiawatha sees the reflection of this bright being. And he looks, and when he sees this bright being, he mistakes it for himself, and he remembers his own true divine nature. He remembers the light inside of him. He remembers the love that lives inside of him. And at that moment, he tosses away that meat. He begins to remember who he is. And so from that point forward, he worked with the peacemaker to bring peace to these warring tribes. And there's a third figure in the story that often gets left behind. And actually, she's left behind in this picture, but I put her here. And she is Jigonsase. She represents the feminine element in this triptych, this group of 3 that bring peace to the people, to the warring tribes in a dark time. And she's a very much a Vesta kind of figure, or some would say Mary Magdalene, depending. where she is the one individual who has a place where everyone can come and sit and eat at her table. So she has an inn or a tavern or a place that's at the crossroads where all the warring tribes come together. So that's the one zone of peace is what she's created through, they have to eat, they take care of themselves there. And it's a very strange thing. This is the zone of safety where everyone meets. It's the feminine. That's what she does. She creates that inclusive space where everyone has a place at the table. Is that Libra or is that Libra? Is that the feminine or is that the feminine? And I'm not talking about gender. I'm talking about what's missing from our current equation. So Jigon Sase has that role. And of course, she's mostly left out of the stories, but we're bringing her back. So in the stories, Hiawatha and the Peacemaker worked for 25 years, according to some versions, to try to bring together these nations. Because imagine you killed my uncle. I mean, can you imagine the depth of I mean, what it would take to bring healing to the people of Palestine and Israel? I mean, what will that take? What will that take? So they brought together all the tribes, and then it comes time. The Onondaga have a leader who is seen as being very, very dark, a very violent figure, very evil. He's like a sorcerer, and they say that he has snakes in his hair. Interesting, right? Snakes in his hair. And so he's the last one that they haven't convinced. And in fact, this is the grief of this figure, Hiawatha, is that because of his attempts to bring Tadodada Ho, this sorcerer, into the fold, into this confederacy, 3 of his daughters have died. So he has literally lost his 3 beloved daughters, supposedly because of the black magic of this being. Despite that, and this is what I'm going to read to you because I'm going to stop my share for a second to read this because I have to be able to read this from here. There are different versions of this story, as is always true. And oh my gosh,